The day began like any other, yet an uneasy weight pressed against the walls of my apartment, as if the shadows themselves were waiting for something to unfold. My son, Jabari, had said he was going to the cemetery to visit his father, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe him. A flicker of warmth, a memory of the little boy whose scraped knees I had kissed better, surfaced, soft and fragile, like the first sunlight through winter clouds. But deep inside, something warned me, not everything was as it seemed. I watched the dust swirl in the golden morning light, the particles dancing lazily over the spines of my husband's books. Each volume was a monument to his mind, a testament to the life we had shared. 5 years had passed since he left, yet his presence lingered like a perfume in the air, unyielding and comforting. Today, however, the anniversary felt different. Heavy, thick, like molasses, pressing on my chest, suffocating yet impossible to ignore. I poured my tea, letting the steam curl upward in quiet, hypnotic spirals. Its warmth seeped into my hands, but it could not reach the chill that had settled deep within me. For 5 years, I had waited for signs of love, of care, of even a flicker of the man my son once was. And every year, like clockwork, Jabari and his wife appeared on this day not to mourn, not to remember, but to demand. To take. When the doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, I felt the old familiar pang of expectation and dread. Jabari's voice carried through the hallway before I even opened the door, loud, cheerful, deliberate. He hugged me awkwardly, his cologne masking a tension I had learned to recognize over years of observation. Followed like a shadow, her expression carefully manufactured, an illusion of sorrow meant to persuade, to manipulate, to conceal. They stepped into the apartment, their eyes scanning the familiar spaces with a mix of calculated interest and feigned reverence. I noted every detail, the slight flicker of gaze toward the study, the way Jabari's hands flexed ever so slightly as he lowered himself into his father's armchair. Their movements were fluid, confident, rehearsed. They believed themselves clever. They did not know that every gesture, every glance, every carefully chosen word was being catalogued in my mind with the precision of a seasoned observer. Ma, Jabari began, his voice soft and measured. We were just talking about a small opportunity. Nothing huge, but it's urgent. We'd hate for it to fall through. He tilted his head slightly, eyes glinting, a silent reinforcement of the narrative he had prepared. Chimed in, her voice melodic, perfectly practiced. It's really just a minor thing, Ma, but it could mean so much. We wouldn't ask if it weren't important. And yet, beneath their polished words, I sensed the truth. The thrill of potential gain hid behind the mask of family affection. The subtle tension, the glimmer of anxiety, these were not mistakes. They were habits, patterns I had seen before, repeated and perfected. I knew them too well. I nodded, smiling lightly, offering words of polite attention while my mind catalogued, analyzed, and waited. Every study, every sigh, every glance was a thread in a web of deception. I let them speak, letting the pretense roll over me like water over stone, while inside the familiar warmth of hope stirred, a dangerous, delicate spark. Could my son really still care? Could there be truth behind the practiced gestures? The temptation to believe was strong, intoxicating. For a brief moment, I almost forgot the countless times I had been deceived, the years of careful observation, the patience I had cultivated. But then, a small detail, a hesitation, a glance too fleeting to be accidental, brought the chill of certainty back. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And in that instant, as they continued their delicate performance of grief and urgency, I realized that the day would not unfold like any other. Today, the truth would either reveal itself in full or shatter everything I had ever believed about family, loyalty, and trust. The dust swirled in the shafts of sunlight. The tea steamed gently in my hands. And I knew I would watch. I would wait. And I would see. The apartment was quiet, yet it breathed with memory. Every corner, every shadow, every polished surface carried the imprint of the life my husband and I had built together. The morning sunlight filtered through the heavy velvet drapes, falling in long, golden beams that illuminated the dust in the air. Each speck danced slowly, suspended as if in reverence to the years that had passed and the absence that lingered still. I moved through the rooms deliberately, my feet soft against the worn carpet. The scent of tea filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint perfume of geraniums on the windowsill. These small details, the aroma, the warmth, the light, were familiar, comforting, and yet bittersweet. 5 years. It had been exactly 5 years since had passed. 5 years of quiet apartments, evenings spent alone, and mornings that seemed to stretch endlessly like the shadows across the walls. His study remained untouched, a testament to the life he had led. The massive mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface polished to a muted shine, the chair indented from years of work and thought. Books lined every wall, their spines a mix of faded leather, gilt lettering, and the delicate wear of hands that had opened them countless times. It was not merely a library, it was his world, and now it felt like a cathedral of memory. I was its silent caretaker, moving among the shelves as if tracing the invisible presence of his mind. My own corner, a small writing desk near the window, was a shrine of neglect. Geraniums leaned slightly toward the light, their leaves dusted with the fine powder that never seemed to settle completely. My tools, long abandoned, rested in the drawer unopened for decades. The weight of time pressed down here differently than it did in the rest of the apartment, a reminder that life had moved on for everyone else but not for me. I prepared my tea with a deliberate care that had become ritualistic over the years. The steam curled upward, carrying a faint sweetness and warmth, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe. The apartment was silent except for the soft ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Its rhythm was hypnotic, steady, and grounding, a heartbeat I could rely on amidst the uncertainty of human behavior. Outside, the world moved forward, oblivious to the weight that rested here. People walked, cars passed, birds called to one another. But inside, time seemed suspended, holding its breath, waiting for something unseen. Today especially carried that tension. Today marked 5th death anniversary, a day that drew my son and his wife like moths to a flame. And though my instincts whispered caution, a fragile part of me dared to hope that they would arrive with sincerity, with grief, with even a hint of love. The apartment was prepared for them, though not for comfort. It was a stage. Every cushion, every cup, every book was arranged meticulously, each in its place, creating the illusion of calm and normalcy. But beneath that surface, my mind moved like a quiet predator, watching, analyzing, anticipating. Years of loss had sharpened my senses. Years of disappointment had honed my patience. Today, I would observe closely, even as I pretended to welcome the familiar chaos. I moved from room to room, each step deliberate. The living room gleamed under the morning light, polished wood catching the sun, reflecting patterns onto the walls. The sofa and chairs were arranged not merely for seating but for observation, allowing me to see every gesture, every movement, every detail that might pass unnoticed. In the corners, shadows pooled where light did not reach, providing natural concealment for the truths I intended to witness. In the kitchen, the tea was ready. The aroma of freshly baked pastries, stirred carefully and in a glass dome, filled the air. I placed them on a tray, along with delicate porcelain cups and a small bowl of sugar cubes, each arranged just so. The appearance of normalcy was essential. The warmth, the attention to detail, the quiet hospitality, they were tools as much as gestures of kindness. They would lull the deceivers into confidence, making their eventual exposure all the more potent. I paused by the window, gazing out at the familiar city skyline. The streets shimmered with morning sunlight, people moving purposefully along sidewalks, cars glinting in the reflective surfaces. And yet, I felt detached, observing the world from a distance, as if the apartment were a glass bubble separated from a ordinary life. Within this bubble, memories lingered, emotions simmered, and intentions waited to reveal themselves. My mind wandered briefly, imagining him here, perhaps laughing softly at my meticulous preparations or frowning at my careful attention to detail. I could almost hear his voice, the deep timbre carrying warmth, humor, and authority all at once. His absence was tangible, a constant presence in every room, every gesture, every thought. And now, after 5 years, his memory was about to intersect with the living, with my son and his wife, in a way I could neither ignore nor control. The apartment, in all its silent grandeur, was a reflection of what had been lost and what remained. The furniture, the books, the small decorative objects, they were relics of a life that demanded respect. And as I walked among them, brushing lightly against the spines of books, the curve of the desk, the delicate petals of the geraniums, I felt a resolve settling deep inside me. This day would not be like the others. Somewhere beyond the heavy velvet drapes, the world continued its annoying march. Here, within the sanctuary of walls lined with memory and dust, I prepared myself to face a different kind of reckoning. The air felt charged, taut with anticipation. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every dust mote seemed to whisper warnings I could not ignore. And as I stood, teacup in hand, gazing at the familiar spaces that had become both refuge and stage, I knew that nothing in my experience had fully prepared me for what was coming. Because soon the doorbell would ring, and the day of remembrance would collide with the reality of my son's ambitions, and with the betrayal I had begun to sense, though not yet fully understood. I took a slow, deliberate sip of tea, letting the warmth flow through me, grounding me, preparing me. Outside, the city moved on, but inside, time had paused. I waited, ready to observe, ready to see, ready to face what had long been brewing in silence. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, each sound a quiet reminder of passing time. I had poured tea, set out delicate pastries, and arranged the living room just as I always did on this anniversary. My heart was a careful rhythm of hope and apprehension, a strange mixture of anticipation and weariness. When the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, it started me not from fear, but from the inevitability of it. I knew who it would be before I even crossed the threshold. Jabari. His voice, always louder than necessary, carried through the hallway moments later, bright and deliberate. Ma. Good morning. I opened the door to find him standing there, smiling, the faint scent of cologne masking the subtle edge of nervousness he could not fully conceal. His presence was familiar, yet unsettling. Behind him, followed silently, moving like a shadow, her expression carefully crafted into one of gentle sorrow. He embraced me awkwardly, brushing his cheek against mine, and I felt the weight of years, the distance that had grown between us, press in. His hug was more ritual than affection, and yet my heart, old, hopeful, tired, recognized it. A small warmth flickered, fragile and fleeting, before I reminded myself to observe, to wait. I scanned the apartment with practiced attention, not stopping to admire or remember, but evaluating. Her gaze lingered just long enough on the study door, the shelves, the stacks of books, and then moved on, as if noting potential opportunity hidden behind the veneer of family. I watched her, noting every detail. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way her lips pressed together for a fraction longer than necessary, the subtle calculation in her eyes. I led them into the living room, offering a smile that I intended to be warm but neutral. Every movement, every gesture, was deliberate. I poured tea into the porcelain cups I had arranged, careful not to spill a drop. The steam rose in delicate curls, masking the subtle tension in the room, disguising the battle that was about to unfold beneath calm smiles. Jabari sank into his father's armchair with a familiarity that always unsettled me. It was his chair, yes, but only my husband's presence had ever belonged there naturally. Jabari's attempt to occupy it was theatrical, a silent mimicry of authority he had never earned. I noted the way his fingers drummed against the armrest, the faint tightening of his jaw, the deliberate exhale meant to convey ease. Perched gracefully on the edge of the sofa, hands folded neatly on her lap, the image of perfect composure. Yet I caught the quick glance she cast toward the study, a spark of interest, a subtle desire to explore, to claim what she could not rightfully access. I saw it in her eyes, calculated, eager, and repentant. They spoke first of matters trivial, the weather, minor updates on life, small gestures of politeness. Their words were carefully chosen, light and unthreatening. But beneath each syllable lay a tension, a hidden motive. I listened, noting how Jabari's voice carried a subtle lilt when he attempted to appear sincere, how laughter, soft and melodic, was carefully timed to elicit trust and camaraderie. And then they moved on to the true purpose of their visit. Jabari leaned slightly forward, a practiced gesture of intimacy and trust. "Ma," he began, voice soft, careful, "we've run into a bit of trouble. Nothing too serious, but it's urgent. We'd hate for it to slip through our fingers." Nodded, her voice a gentle melody. "It's a small investment, Ma, really. But if we don't act quickly, everything could fall apart. You know we'd never trouble you unless it were necessary." The words were rehearsed, each syllable a subtle tug on the strings of maternal concern. But I had learned over the years to read between the lines, to hear the truths hidden beneath the performance. My mind catalogued every detail, the slight twitch of Jabari's hand as he gestured, the subtle shift of body toward the desk, the way their eyes flickered briefly toward valuables they hoped I would overlook. I nodded, letting my face remain calm, neutral, even inviting. "I see," I said softly. "Tell me more about this urgent opportunity." They launched into their story, customs delays, lost merchandise, investments at risk. Each detail was crafted to provoke concern, to elicit a promise of assistance without revealing their true intentions. Was, laced with feigned desperation, was meant to disarm me. Jabari's sighs and small pauses were designed to coax empathy. And yet, I remained calm, my heart a quiet observer to the carefully orchestrated performance before me. While they spoke, I drifted briefly into memory. I recalled the years of subtle manipulation, the countless times Jabari had perfected the art of appearing vulnerable to gain advantage. I remembered his childhood tears, his strategic complaints, the careful timing of requests designed to exploit my maternal instinct. And now, as an adult, he had elevated the performance, combining charm, urgency, and precision. I busied myself with small tasks in the kitchen, arranging pastries, pouring more tea, offering words of mild encouragement. Each action was deliberate, a way to maintain the illusion of trust while observing every gesture, every expression, every pause. The apartment, bathed in warm sunlight, seemed peaceful, ordinary, but beneath that calm, a tension simmered, dense and palpable. Hours passed with the steady rhythm of conversation, laughter, and polite concern. Jabari leaned back, stretching slightly, a careful display of ease meant to disguise the stress of his scheme. Fingers twitched subtly as she adjusted her posture, betraying the excitement she thought she had hidden. Every signal, every nuance, spoke to me more clearly than any words could. Their intentions were far from innocent. And yet, in that moment, a fragment of hope flickered. Could it be possible that a trace of love, a trace of memory of his father, still lingered in my son? A fleeting thought, fragile and dangerous, whispered through me. But I silenced it. Observation came first. Patience came first. And understanding the depth of their true intentions would come only after the careful, unyielding watch I had cultivated over years. As the afternoon sun shifted, casting long shadows across the apartment, I felt the subtle tightening of anticipation. The stage was set. The players were in position. And all that remained was to see how their performance would unfold, how the threads of manipulation, deceit, and pretense would unravel under the scrutiny of one who had learned to watch, to wait, and to see clearly. The doorbell, the cologne, the carefully manufactured expressions, they were all pieces of a story I had read before. And yet, the outcome remained uncertain, the tension electric, pressing against every wall, every book, every shadow in the apartment. Today I would witness everything. The afternoon wore on, sunlight dimming gradually as it filtered through the heavy velvet drapes, leaving the apartment bathed in a soft, amber glow. The warmth of tea lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the subtle perfume of geraniums, yet beneath that gentle comfort, anise settled like a shadow. My mind, honed by years of observation and tempered by grief, began to notice the details others would miss, the slight hesitation in Jabari's words, the way eyes lingered too long on the study door, the way their smiles carried a practiced, almost mechanical quality. It began with small inconsistencies, almost imperceptible at first. A pause too long when discussing an urgent investment. A gesture repeated and naturally, as if rehearsed for maximum effect. Laughter, light and melodic, didn't quite reach her eyes, which darted to the shelves and furniture with subtle calculation. Jabari's sighs, carefully placed between phrases of concern, seemed intended to coax empathy rather than express genuine worry. I poured another cup of tea, letting my fingers trace the delicate porcelain, grounding myself in the rhythm of small tasks while my mind catalogued every nuance. Observation was both shield and weapon. I could smile politely, offer kind words, nod as they spoke of deaths and opportunities, yet inside, I was taking mental notes, every pause, every glance, ever feeding a larger pattern I had seen before. Ma, Jabari began, his voice deceptively soft. This is just a small matter, but the timing is crucial. We wouldn't ask if it weren't important. Nodded in careful agreement, her hands resting lightly on her lap, but I noticed the subtle tension in her fingers, a sign of eagerness. Their performance was almost flawless, but perfection is often a sign of artifice. It's in the small, unintentional movements that the truth hides, and I had learned to read them well. I abandoned into the study under the pretext of checking the tea, allowing my eyes to scan the room while my attention remained on the living room. From this vantage point, I could observe their interactions with clarity. Jabari's gaze lingered on a small box atop the desk, almost imperceptibly, and head tilted slightly in the same direction, as if silently calculating. They were drawn not by nostalgia or grief, but by opportunity, subtle, measured, predatory. I remembered the childhood days when Jabari had learned early how to use tears to manipulate. The moments when a quivering lip and pleading eyes could bend my will, when innocence and trust were leveraged for small gains. Now the child had grown, refined his tools, and added to the equation. Together they were efficient, practiced, and dangerous. The afternoon shadows lengthened, creeping across the polished floors and up the walls. I noticed how Jabari's voice carried a slightly artificial tremor, timed with calculated pauses to provoke a maternal response. Expressions were rehearsed to perfection, each flicker of concern timed to disarm and distract. They were playing a game they believed I could not see, yet I had observed its patterns countless times before. And yet, something lingered beneath it all, a whisper of doubt, a thread of hope. Could there be a trace of genuine emotion somewhere, hidden beneath their performance? I dared to entertain the thought, just long enough to feel the fragile pull of hope, then cast it aside. Suspicion, after all, is the lens through which clarity is achieved. I moved through the apartment slowly, placing small snacks on a tray, adjusting the cushions, and pretending to busy myself. Every action was deliberate, every glance calculated. Their attempts to manipulate were subtle, but they left traces, tiny inconsistencies that accumulated into a pattern. The more I observed, the more the cracks in their performance appeared. Jabari's smile faltered for the briefest moment when whispered something to him. A flicker of frustration passed across his features, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Careful pause wavered as she glanced toward the study again, and I could see her momentary panic at being watched too closely. These tiny fissures were evidence of the truth they were trying to conceal. I allowed them to speak freely, letting the conversation drift from minor financial woes to more urgent matters. Each story was a thread, intended to ensnare, and I let them weave it while remaining detached, silent, and watchful. The more they spoke, the more their eagerness and tension revealed the depth of their intentions. The afternoon sun continued its slow descent, casting long, golden streaks across the room. Shadows stretched over the furniture, over the faces of my son and his wife, highlighting the subtle betrayals in their gestures. Each movement, each glance, each carefully orchestrated phrase added weight to the suspicion that had been building inside me. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the tea in my hands. The familiarity of their tactics was unsettling. This was no ordinary request for help, this was a carefully constructed operation, a performance designed to manipulate, extract, and deceive. Yet the truth was not fully visible, hidden beneath layers of charm and artifice. I would need patience, observation, and strategy to see it fully revealed. And then the final signal came, subtle yet unmistakable. A glance between them, a slight nod, the of satisfaction that accompanied confidence in a scheme proceeding smoothly. They believed themselves clever, and aware that every detail, every nuance, every subtle move had been catalogued and analyzed. Their overconfidence was the first true crack in their facade. I took a deep breath, allowing the tension to coalesce into a focused awareness. Every detail mattered, every gesture was a clue, and every word spoken was a potential key to understanding their motives. Suspicion had grown into certainty. They were not here to mourn, not here to remember, but here to take. And the extent of their deception would soon become clear. As shadows darkened the corners of the apartment, and the last slivers of sunlight faded from the windows, I realized the day was nearing its pivotal moment. Observation had revealed the pattern, foreshadowing the inevitable confrontation. I would wait, I would watch, and I would let the truth expose itself. Because beneath their rehearsed smiles, beneath the polished words and feigned concern, lay the undeniable reality. Betrayal was in motion, and I was the only one aware of its trajectory. The afternoon sunlight had softened into a muted amber, stretching shadows across the polished wooden floors of the living room. Every corner of the apartment seemed alive with quiet expectation, as if even the furniture had learned to anticipate what was coming. I moved among the familiar species, pouring tea, adjusting cushions, arranging pastries, all while maintaining an outward calm that belied the storm of observation within me. Jabari leaned back in his father's armchair, a practiced display of relaxation. His hand drummed lightly against the armrest, a subtle rhythm meant to convey casual ease. Yet beneath that superficial calm, I sensed tension coiled tightly within him, the strain of maintaining a carefully constructed narrative. Sat elegantly on the sofa, hands clasped lightly in her lap, eyes darting briefly to the study, then back at me, as if to reassure herself that no threat loomed. Their performance was flawless in its superficiality, too flawless in fact. Perfectly timed gestures, carefully measured tones, rehearsed pauses. And yet, no matter how well they tried, there were cracks. Tiny, fleeting signals that betrayed the reality they sought to conceal. I noticed the subtle flicker of impatience in Jabari's jawline when I did not immediately respond to his tale of financial woe. I saw the of excitement in eyes when she mentioned the potential for quick gain. Every detail was catalogued, stored in memory, ready to be understood when the moment arrived. I moved to the kitchen and in the guise of checking the tea. From there, I could observe them without being obvious, my eyes tracing every nuance. Jabari's voice carried that practiced inflection of urgency, soft and coaxing, while laughter, light and melodic, was timed to encourage trust and placate suspicion. They were trying to manipulate me, and yet they did not realize that every motion, every word, every flicker of expression had already been noted. As I moved, my mind replayed memories of the past 5 years. The quiet disappointment, the careful observation, the subtle betrayals, all of it had led to this moment. Jabari had always been clever, using charm and tears to gain advantage, and had joined him seamlessly in this dance of manipulation. Together, they were formidable, yet their ambitions, no matter how cunningly hidden, would be visible to one who had learned to watch. I set a small tray of pastries on the coffee table, arranging them with deliberate care. Each movement was part of the theater, a signal that all was calm and ordinary, even as tension thickened in the room. I allowed them to continue their conversation, letting their words flow freely. The story of debts, missed shipments, and urgent opportunities was rehearsed, polished, and designed to provoke worry, guilt, or empathy. And yet, beneath their words, I heard the truth. The excitement of gain, the thrill of deceit, the careful calculations of two minds working in tandem to exploit trust. Jabari leaned forward slightly, a subtle signal of intimacy, designed to draw me in. "Ma," he said, was gentle, "we wouldn't ask if it weren't serious. It's important. We need your help." Added softly, "We wouldn't ask unless it truly mattered. Please, Ma, this could make all the difference." The words were carefully chosen, deliberate in their impact, but the gestures accompanying them betrayed their intentions. Jabari's eyes shifted briefly to a cabinet containing valuables, and fingers twitched in anticipation. I saw it all, catalogued it all, and allowed a faint, imperceptible smile to touch my lips. They believed themselves clever, but they underestimated the depth of my observation and the patience I had cultivated over years of careful vigilance. As the afternoon wore on, the tension in the room grew heavier, like air before a storm. I poured more tea, arranging the cups and pastries again as if to occupy myself, but my attention never wavered. I watched the subtle interactions. Jabari's hand brushing the edge of the armchair, foot shifting slightly as she tried to maintain composure, their eyes meeting briefly in silent communication. Each gesture, each movement, was a clue to the web of deceit they had spun. I reflected on the years since passing, the loneliness, the grief, the quiet patience that had become my strength. I had learned to read intentions, to detect manipulation, to anticipate the subtle moves of those who sought advantage at my expense. And now, the culmination of those lessons was evident. I was calm, deliberate, and prepared to navigate the unfolding situation with precision. I allowed them to continue, letting them reveal more than they intended. They spoke of urgent payments, of containers stuck in ports, of investments teetering on the brink of collapse. Their language was carefully chosen to elicit concern, to manipulate emotions, and to create a sense of obligation. But I noticed the discrepancies, the tiny exaggerations, the moments where their rehearsed concern faltered for a fraction of a second. Those moments were evidence, proof of the true nature of their intentions. The room seemed to pulse with tension, each shadow deepening, each movement charged with significance. I maintained a calm exterior, but inside, I catalogued every gesture, every glance, every. My senses were heightened, my awareness sharpened. I was no longer merely a participant. I was the observer, the strategist, the silent force guiding the unfolding narrative. Jabari shifted in his seat, attempting to appear casual, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed impatience. Eyes flicked toward the study again, a brief hesitation, as if she longed to investigate what they could not openly see. I noted these movements carefully, stirring them for later reflection. The tension was building, and I allowed it to do so, knowing that anticipation would heighten the eventual revelation. I moved closer to the window, pretending to admire the view, while keeping my attention on them. Jabari's hand rested lightly on the armrest, a deliberate signal of ease, while posture remained rigid, a sign of controlled excitement. Each detail was a thread, weaving a tapestry that revealed the underlying truth. They were not here to grieve, not here to remember, but here to take, to manipulate, and to exploit. The afternoon continued its slow march, and I allowed the tension to rise naturally. I spoke occasionally, gentle words that encouraged them to continue, that prompted them to reveal more than they intended. Their carefully rehearsed narrative began to show faint cracks, small hesitations, brief misalignments in gestures, moments of impatience. These imperfections were the foreshadowing I needed, the subtle warnings that the truth was close to the surface. I recalled how, as a child, Jabari had learned the art of persuasion, how he had used emotion to influence, to manipulate, to achieve. Skilled and cunning had honed these skills into a partnership of careful calculation. And now, together, they had escalated their ambitions, and yet, they were unaware of the depth of my vigilance. Their overconfidence was my advantage, their rehearsal my guide. As the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the apartment, the tension became almost tangible. Every movement, every glance, every word was charged with unspoken meaning. I allowed the silence between them to stretch, the pauses in conversation to linger, knowing that discomfort and anticipation would expose more than their rehearsed words ever could. Finally, a small slip, a gesture, a glance, a hesitation, revealed the depth of their intentions. They believed they were in control, yet the cracks in their performance were visible to one who had watched closely for years. The foreshadowing was clear. That they would end not with polite conversation but with confrontation, and the truth, long hidden beneath rehearsed smiles and careful gestures, would finally emerge. I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The tension was perfect, the setup complete. Their manipulations had been revealed in subtle hints, their intentions foreshadowed by small, unintentional signs. And now, all that remained was to allow events to unfold, to witness the inevitable exposure of deceit, and to prepare for the confrontation that would finally lay bare the truth. Evening had fallen, and the apartment, once bathed in soft amber sunlight, was now cloaked in the dim glow of lamps. Shadows stretched long and thin across the floors, walls, and shelves, filling the corners with an ominous weight. Every book, every artifact of my late husband's life seemed to watch silently as the truth began to emerge. Jabari and continued their performance, unaware that I had seen through it all. Each gesture, each carefully calculated word, each manufactured sigh had been catalogued and studied, recorded in my memory like pieces of a puzzle. They believed their charm and rehearsed emotion would suffice. They had underestimated not just me, but the depth of my attention and the patience of a mother who had learned to watch. I moved slowly through the apartment, carrying a tray with freshly brewed tea and small pastries. My movements were deliberate, casual, masking the storm of awareness that raged quietly within. I placed the tray on the table, offering polite words and smiles, all the while observing. Every flicker of expression, every subtle signal, spoke volumes. "Ma," Jabari began, his voice soft, a carefully measured mixture of urgency and coaxing, "we've run into a real problem. It's serious. We need your help." Leaned slightly forward, her voice melodic, soft, and practiced. It's a matter of importance, Ma. We wouldn't trouble you unless it were critical. Please, we're desperate. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression calm and neutral, letting their words wash over me while my mind analyzed and catalogued. Their performance was excellent, almost flawless, but flaws, however small, were visible to one who had been observing for years. The first indication of real intent came not from words, but from actions. Jabari's eyes flickered repeatedly toward a small cabinet I had kept locked since my husband's passing, a cabinet containing items of value that should have remained untouched. Gaze followed almost instantly, a subtle tension in her posture betraying anticipation. Their plan was clear, their target obvious. I allowed them to continue, letting their rehearsed story of financial urgency unfold. I did not interrupt. I did not act. Observation was my weapon. Patience was my shield. And then, when the moment was right, the true betrayal would be revealed. As they spoke of debts, blocked shipments, and urgent investments, they grew bolder, more confident. The performance of concern, desperation, and subtle flattery had been carefully calibrated. Laughter, soft and melodic, was intended to disarm. Jabari's sighs and careful gestures of vulnerability were meant to evoke pity. But I noticed the tiny cracks, the hesitation, the fleeting glances at valuables, the subtle excitement beneath the veneer of worry. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else. A twitch of a finger, a glance too long, a pause too measured. But to me it was unmistakable. Their intentions were no longer hidden. This was not grief. This was manipulation. This was betrayal. I excused myself briefly, ostensibly to check on the tea, but in reality, to gather a small notebook where I had recorded past observations, patterns, behaviors, small tells. I flipped through pages that had long become mental habits, etched into memory over the years. Each entry, each note, was a piece of the puzzle, confirming what I already suspected. Returning to the living room, I positioned myself to observe without being obvious. Jabari and spoke more freely now, and aware that their confidence would be their undoing. The urgency, the rehearsed concern, the careful flattery, all of it was designed to extract trust, to gain access to resources that were not theirs to take. I noticed the first truly revealing act. Jabari leaned slightly toward the locked cabinet, as if calculating how to gain entry without my noticing. Hand twitched, a brief, almost imperceptible movement of eagerness. They were coordinated, practiced, and audacious, but they had not accounted for my vigilance. I decided the moment had come to confront them. Calmly, I set down the tea tray and stepped toward the center of the room. My voice steady, controlled, carrying a quiet authority that demanded attention. Jabari, I said softly, letting the weight of my presence sit around us. I think it's time we stopped pretending. He froze, the practiced ease evaporating like mist under the morning sun. Head tilted slightly, a faint flicker of panic in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a controlled smile. "What do you mean, Ma?" Jabari asked, his voice a shade too high, betraying tension. "I mean this," I said, gesturing toward the locked cabinet. "I know exactly why you're here. I know what you're after. And I've seen everything you've tried to hide." Hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her composure, once flawless, now trembled subtly. Jabari's jaw tightened, a silent battle to maintain control of his emotions. But the truth, long buried beneath rehearsed charm and deception, had been unearthed. You don't understand," Jabari stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, voice calm but unwavering. "I understand your greed, your manipulation, your audacity. I understand the rehearsed tears, the practiced sighs, the calculated glances at things that do not belong to you. I have watched you for years, and today all of it is revealed." Eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her mask. Ma, we were only trying to help ourselves. Help yourselves, I echoed, voice sharp, slicing through the carefully constructed illusion. At the expense of family, of trust, of the memory of your father. Jabari rose, attempting to assert dominance, but the tension in his posture betrayed his internal panic. Ma, we needed. You needed. I repeated, stepping closer, letting the weight of words hang in the air. You needed to steal from me, from this home, from the legacy your father left us. Do you think I am blind to the gleam in your eyes when you plotted, to the rehearsed sorrow, to the false urgency? Face fell, her carefully crafted mask slipping. We didn't mean, we thought it would. You thought it would what? I demanded. That I wouldn't see. That I wouldn't know. That I wouldn't notice every gesture, every glance, every attempt at manipulation. The room was silent except for the quiet ticking of the clock and the faint rustle of fabric as Jabari and shifted uneasily. Their confidence had been stripped away by the calm and wavering gaze of a mother who had watched, waited, and understood. You see, I continued, was steady, love and trust are not weapons to be wielded. They are gifts, not tools for personal gain. And today, your deceit has been laid bare. You may have believed yourselves clever, but cleverness is no match for vigilance, patience, and understanding cultivated over decades. Jabari's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, genuine fear flickered in his eyes. Composure crumbled completely, a mixture of shame and panic overtaking her carefully maintained pause. The betrayal, once hidden beneath polished words and rehearsed gestures, now stood revealed in the harsh light of truth. I gestured toward the study, toward the cabinet they had sought to exploit. Everything you plotted, every attempt at manipulation is visible. Your intentions, your schemes, your greed, it is all here, undeniable. And now you must face it. They looked at me, eyes wide, hearts exposed, realizing that the theater they had performed so meticulously was over. The tension that had built all afternoon now exploded into clarity. The betrayal, long foreshadowed and carefully hidden, was fully revealed. I stepped back, letting the weight of the revelation settle in the room. Silence enveloped us, heavy, thick, and undeniable. They had been caught, exposed, and stripped of their false confidence. You are no longer the children I once knew, I said quietly, was carrying the weight of disappointment and resolve. You are no longer simply loved and forgiven. Today you stand revealed and you must reckon with what that means. Jabari opened his mouth, then closed it. Lowered her gaze. Words failed them. The confrontation had stripped away the mask, revealing the raw, naked truth. Betrayal had been unmasked, and there was no place left to hide. And in that silence, I realized the final truth. Vigilance, patience, and observation had vanished. The betrayal had been revealed, the manipulators exposed, and the stage was set for the reckoning that would follow. A reckoning that would leave no room for pretense, no place for deceit, no comfort for those who had once believed themselves clever enough to deceive a mother who had seen everything. The apartment seemed suddenly emptier, though no one had left. The weight of silence settled heavily over the room, pressing into every corner. Jabari and sat frozen, their faces pale, eyes wide and guilty, shadows of their previous confidence crumbled into nothing. The room felt like a stage where the final act had ended, leaving behind the raw aftermath of truth. I sank slowly into my late husband's armchair, letting my hands rest on its warm, familiar arms. The fabric carried decades of memory, the smell of his cologne long faded, the indentation of his presence still lingering. I allowed myself a long, deliberate breath, letting the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. For years, I had cultivated patience, vigilance, and awareness. Now, those qualities were my armor as I faced the emotions stirred by their betrayal. The first wave was shock, not at their deceit, for I had anticipated it, but at the audacity, the depth, and the cold calculation they had shown. I had known Jabari's tendencies, had seen the signs of manipulation for years, yet the clarity of their intentions hitting me in the quiet aftermath was still jarring. Too had been a carefully integrated partner in this scheme, her elegance and charm hiding ambition, greed, and skillful deceit. They had worked together seamlessly, yet I had watched it all unravel in plain sight. A quiet anger began to burn within me, not the wild and controlled rage of impulsive reaction, but a cold, measured anger sharpened by years of disappointment and careful observation. How dare they exploit familial love, manipulate the trust that had been freely given, and attempt to profit from the legacy of a man who had loved them both? I looked at Jabari first, his head slightly bowed, hands clenching and unclenching in silent remorse, or perhaps in futile calculations of damage control. Jabari, I said softly but with a firmness that brooked no argument, look at what you have done. Do you understand what betrayal feels like? Do you even comprehend how deeply you have wounded the one person who has never stopped loving you? He swallowed hard, eyes flickering with a mixture of shame, fear, and something else I could not name. Ma. I didn't think it would. I mean, we thought. You thought. I interrupted, my voice rising slightly, shaking only from the weight of disappointment. You thought a mother's love could be bought or tricked. You thought grief, memory, and trust were tools for your gain. You thought deception could replace sincerity. Shifted slightly in her seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face, once composed and practiced, now revealed a trace of panic. We didn't mean to hurt anyone, she said, voice quivering despite her attempts at control. But you did, I said, letting each word fall slowly, deliberately. Every word, every gesture, every plan you concocted was intended to deceive, to manipulate, to take advantage of the love and trust that should never have been tested this way. And now it is exposed. The weight of my gaze seemed to press upon them, forcing them to confront what they had done. I felt a mixture of grief, anger, and sorrow for the children they once were, the boys and girls who had been innocent, trusting, and naive, and the adults they had chosen to become, calculated, manipulative, and cunning. For a moment, I simply watched, allowing them to absorb the reality of their actions. The silence in the room was almost unbearable, broken only by the faint tick of the clock and the shallow, uneven breaths of two people who suddenly realized the extent of their exposure. I felt a cold satisfaction at having seen through their deception, tempered immediately by a deep sadness. Love had been misused, trust had been broken, and innocence, long gone, could not be reclaimed. I have spent years observing, waiting, and learning, I continued, my voice steady now, calm but unwavering. I have watched patterns, studied behaviors, and noted intentions. I have tolerated small deceits, minor manipulations, and the occasional misstep because I believed in the possibility of growth. But this was not a momentary lapse. This was calculated, premeditated, and deliberate. Jabari lowered his gaze further, silence finally replacing the clumsy defenses he had attempted. Eyes filled with tears, a mixture of shame and guilt reflecting in their depths. They were beginning to understand, finally, the depth of what they had attempted and the futility of their actions. I allowed myself a moment to reflect. My mind drifted to my late husband, to his wisdom, his patience, and his understanding of human nature. I thought of the library, the armchairs, the desks, and the countless memories etched into every corner of this apartment. Everything here spoke of love, learning, and integrity, a life built on honor, not deceit. And now, I realized, the same lessons I had learned and cherished would guide the resolution of this betrayal. Children, I said finally, voice softer, tinged with sorrow. You must understand that trust, once broken, is not easily mended. Love, once exploded, cannot be taken for granted again. I cannot simply pretend that nothing has happened, that all is as it was before. You have chosen this path, and you must face it, with all its consequences. Hands trembled, and Jabari's shoulders sagged further under the weight of my words. Their facade had dissolved entirely, leaving only raw, exposed vulnerability. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for myself, but for the people they had become. The young adults who had been taught lessons poorly, who had confused ambition with entitlement, greed with necessity. You may have thought yourselves clever, I said, but cleverness cannot hide the truth from eyes that watch, minds that remember, and hearts that feel. Every small gesture, every word, every hidden motive has been observed, noted, and understood. And today you see what that observation has revealed, your intentions, your deceit, your betrayal. The silence that followed was heavy. I could feel the emotional weight pressing against the walls, seeping into every corner, leaving the apartment saturated with the aftermath of truth. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full measure of what had been broken: trust, love, and the fragile bonds of family that had been so carefully nurtured over decades. Now, I continued, was calm but resolute. The question is, what will you do with this revelation? Will you attempt to justify, to manipulate further, or will you finally understand the gravity of your actions and begin to repair what you have so thoroughly damaged? Jabari looked at me, eyes heavy with shame, lips pressed into a thin line. Tears fell silently, and for a moment, the room was filled only with the quiet sound of realization, the recognition that deceit had consequences, that manipulation could not hide from truth, and that love, once violated, required acknowledgement and contrition before it could ever be restored. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch, giving them the space to absorb the magnitude of their betrayal. And in that moment, I realized that this reaction, this confrontation, was not just about punishment or revelation, it was about clarity, about truth, about setting the foundation for what could come next. You will not leave this room without understanding one thing, I said, was steady and unwavering. The love of a parent is not a currency to be spent. The trust of a mother is not a tool to be wielded. You have crossed a line, and the line has consequences. You must face them, internalize them, and if possible, begin the long path toward making amends. The room remained silent. Their heads bowed, their expressions marked with the weight of regret and shame. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the betrayal had been unmasked, that the truth was clear. Sorrow that it had come to this, that love had been misused, and trust had been violated so profoundly. I rose from the armchair, moving slowly toward the window, gazing out at the city beyond. The fading light of evening cast a golden hue over the skyline, a reminder that even after darkness, light persists. And I understood in that quiet reflection that the reaction, the confrontation, the recognition, the acknowledgement of betrayal was only the first step. Healing, restoration, and understanding would come later, slowly, deliberately, and with effort. Turning back to them, I spoke softly but with clarity. This is your moment to understand, to reflect, and to decide who you wish to be. It is not my place to dictate, only to reveal the truth. And the truth is now undeniable. Betrayal has been exposed, and its weight must be felt. Jabari and nodded, silent, their eyes cast downward. No excuses, no defenses, only the raw acknowledgement of their actions and the beginnings of understanding their consequences. For the first time since this afternoon began, I allowed myself a long breath of relief. The confrontation had revealed the betrayal. The observation, patience, and vigilance had succeeded. And now, in the quiet aftermath, the room felt heavy but clear, a space where truth had triumphed, and reflection had begun. The room remained silent after the confrontation, heavy with tension and the weight of unspoken acknowledgement. Jabari and sat, heads bowed, their previous arrogance and charm stripped away, leaving only the raw exposure of guilt and shame. I could see the spark of realization in their eyes, the first glimmers of understanding that actions, no matter how cleverly disguised, always leave traces. Yet even in this moment of revelation, a quiet, gnawing doubt lingered within me. Had I truly seen everything? Was there more to their scheme than what I had witnessed? The shadows of the evening seemed to whisper that my vigilance, though thorough, might still have overlooked something subtle, something hidden. I moved toward the study, taking deliberate steps, and opened the drawer I had long kept locked. My eyes scanned the contents, letters, journals, small mementos of the life I had shared with my late husband. As I carefully examined each piece, I realized the truth. The betrayal of the present was only part of a larger web. Some threads were invisible, stitched quietly over time, designed to test not only my vigilance but my capacity to endure deceit and maintain composure. Jabari shifted uneasily in his seat, glancing toward the study. "Ma, what are you doing?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, tinged with fear and uncertainty. "I am reviewing the past," I replied calmly, keeping my tone even, controlled. Because betrayal is never just a single act. It is a pattern, a repetition, a test of patience and observation. And patterns, once seen, reveal more than a single moment ever could. Hands trembled slightly, and she swallowed hard. Her previous composure had been shattered entirely. "Ma, we didn't. I mean, we," she faltered, unable to articulate the careful narrative she had rehearsed so many times before. I turned toward them slowly, my expression unreadable, calm yet piercing. "You may think you understand consequences," I said, "but understanding comes too late for those who act in secret. You have been exposed, yes, but exposure alone is not enough. Lessons must be learned, and awareness must take root." They looked at me, confusion and fear mingling in their faces, because they had expected punishment, anger, or perhaps controlled indulgence. Instead, they faced quiet clarity, a calm authority that neither screamed nor begged for acknowledgement, but simply demanded truth. Then, the twist, a revelation they had not anticipated, even as their deceit had been laid bare. I retrieved a small envelope from the desk drawer, when I had prepared long ago, anticipating the inevitability of their ambitions. Inside were documents, photographs, and evidence not only of their current manipulations but of prior schemes and attempts to exploit trust, carefully recorded over years. "This," I said, holding the envelope so they could see it, "contains the entirety of your actions, past and present. Every attempt at manipulation, every act of deceit, every misstep you believed was hidden. And now, you must decide how to respond, not merely to today, but to the entirety of your choices." Jabari's face peeled, and gasped quietly, realizing the depth of exposure. It was not just today's betrayal that had been revealed, it was an entire history, meticulously documented, undeniable and inescapable. "You see," I continued, voice calm but imbued with quiet power, "life does not forgive easily, and deception leaves traces. But there is a path forward if you are willing to walk it with honesty, humility, and effort. You cannot erase the past, but you can choose what kind of people you become from this moment onward." And yet, there was a lesson here that extended beyond simple exposure of wrongdoing. Betrayal, I realized, is rarely a single, isolated act. It is a culmination of patterns, of choices made in secrecy, in haste, or in ambition. Observing it, understanding it, and confronting it requires patience, wisdom, and a willingness to see not only the act itself but the context from which it emerged. For decades, I had cultivated these qualities, often in solitude, often quietly, and today they had served as both shield and lens. I reflected on the moments of vulnerability that had almost fooled me, the tears, the gestures, the carefully crafted words designed to manipulate. In each of these moments, hope had flickered in my heart. I wanted, even briefly, to believe in their sincerity, to find the remnants of the children they once were. And in that desire, I understood something profound. Love is a force. It inspires patience and understanding, but it also exposes one to disappointment and deceit. The challenge is not to deny love, but to temper it with wisdom. The confrontation had been necessary not for punishment, but for clarity. It revealed not only the depth of betrayal but also the potential for acknowledgement, remorse, and transformation. Watching them sit quietly, faces heavy with the weight of understanding, I recognized the first signs of a possible path forward. True redemption, I knew, would require action, consistent, deliberate, and humble. Words alone would never suffice. As I looked around the apartment, each object, each book, each photograph seemed to whisper its own lesson. The library, once a repository of my husband's life and work, had witnessed joy, grief, and now betrayal. The armchair, the desk, the carefully preserved tools and journals, all of it spoke of continuity, resilience, and memory. I understood, more clearly than ever, that the life we build is composed not only of love and trust but also of vigilance, patience, and moral clarity. And yet, even amid reflection, there was space for compassion. I could see in Jabari and eyes the glimmers of recognition, the beginnings of understanding the consequences of their choices. They were not entirely lost, they had been misguided, yes, but the possibility for growth remained. Life is rarely black and white, it is a tapestry of intention, action, and consequence. Today had revealed the stark truths of action, but tomorrow offered the quiet potential of repair, if only they were willing to pursue it with honesty and courage. In my heart, I felt a mixture of sorrow and cautious hope. Sorrow for the innocence lost, for the manipulation disguised as familial affection, and for the trust that had been so carelessly tested. But hope, too, lingered, the hope that truth, when confronted with patience and clarity, could open doors to understanding and change. The path would not be easy, and the scars of betrayal would remain, but awareness is the first step toward healing. As night fell, and the soft glow of lamplight replaced the dying sunlight, I allowed myself a quiet, steadying breath. Reflection, I realized, is not merely about reviewing what has occurred but understanding the meaning behind each choice, the lessons it imparts, and the responsibility it demands. I had witnessed betrayal and in doing so had reaffirmed the values of vigilance, discernment, and integrity. I had also glimpsed the potential for human growth, even when it is most desperately needed. In the silence, I whispered softly to myself, not as a mother reprimanding her children, but as a witness to the human condition. We see, we endure, we learn, and in learning, we shape the future. And in that quiet declaration, I felt the full measure of the day's events set into perspective. Betrayal had been revealed. Truth had been observed. Consequences had been faced. And now, reflection offered clarity, insight, and the faint promise of redemption. The journey ahead, both theirs and mine, would be long and uncertain. But in this moment, the study was complete, if not concluded, a study of trust tested, of love challenged, of human frailty exposed, and of the possibility of learning from what had been broken. The apartment, the memories, the quiet presence of those long gone, all bear witness to it. And in that witness, I found not only grief but wisdom, not only sorrow but understanding, and not only betrayal but the quiet, enduring hope that truth, patience, and reflection can illuminate even the darkest paths. As the night deepened and the apartment settled into silence, I felt a calm that had eluded me throughout the day. The weight of betrayal, confrontation, and revelation had lifted slightly, leaving in its place clarity, understanding, and a quiet resolve. I looked around at the familiar objects of my life, bookshelves lined with knowledge, the armchair worn from years of my late husband's presence, the small desk cluttered with memories of work and love, and realized that life, though tested, endures. The lessons of today were profound. I had seen deception, manipulation, and ambition laid bare, and I had responded not with uncontrolled anger, but with careful observation, patience, and unwavering clarity. I had witnessed my son and his wife confront their choices and their consequences, and though the path to redemption remained uncertain, the first steps had been taken. It was a reminder that truth, when met with patience and courage, carries power far beyond what any scheme or manipulation could achieve. Even in betrayal, there is insight to be gained. Even in deceit, there is a mirror reflecting human ambition, weakness, and vulnerability. And even in the darkest moments, there is the possibility of growth, if one is willing to recognize wrongs, accept consequences, and embrace change. Today, I had witnessed both the fragility and resilience of human nature, the duality of love as both a gift and a potential vulnerability, and the enduring value of vigilance tempered by compassion. To those who watch and listen, remember, relationships are built on trust, patience, and understanding. Love is not a tool to be wielded, nor a currency to be spent. Deception, however cleverly disguised, always leaves traces. But truth, observed and embraced, has the power to illuminate paths through even the darkest shadows. As I closed the day, I felt a sense of quiet hope. The past could not be undone, but the future remained open, an unwritten story shaped by honesty, choice, and reflection. And in that open space, there is possibility, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thank you for joining me in this study today. May it serve as a reminder to observe, to reflect, and to cherish the trust and love that bind us, because in the end, truth is both our shield and our guide.